The rain clouds is of Lono. Lono blows upon the mountain, then falls into the waters of Kane. Waters of Kane flows all the way into the waters of Kanaloa. Evaporation occurs, then the cycle goes on. It's called the water cycle. But the chant that I will be doing speaks of this water cycle. That's your kuleana today. Trying to figure out how we can mala mawai. So I am here to just get you ready. So you gotta get ready. Even though you're late, get ready. A pleasure to be here to represent the National Park in their opening protocol, in their opening kule, in their opening chant. So allow me to give you this chant of Ike. Okay? O Keauhou Ike alaneo, Keauhou kalani lani kukila kila o Keola. E pa ulumai ho'i a wahi mauna o hualalai. Hualalai ho'i no koma kuani malu ho'i ka vai.
Me kako kavilina o ke aloha. Aloha mai kako. On behalf of our Superintendent Tammy DeShane, NPS staff, partners, Advisory Commission, descendants, volunteers and park community, we welcome you, the Commission of Water Resource Management, to Keauhou National Historical Park. Aloha mai. Welcome to Commissioners Ayla, Rosen, Beamer, Buck, Pavao, I might have to cheat sheet, Star, and Yamamura. Aloha mai. We're happy that you're here to join us today as we take the time out to walk along the ancient trails with positive intentions to share with you the spirit and the science of Keauhou as we go along the along our ancestral place. So welcome.
And it was very, very special to Kona people, to everybody who knew this place, primarily because there were 3 very beautiful fish ponds here, a very productive area. This is a place where Kamehameha's bones were reported to be hidden in Keauhou. You'll see that this is no secret. It's all in several historians, like Macau says, talks about it. And it was first managed by Kamehameha Moku and other ancient Hawaiian Konohiki, and through various land changes and purchases, it fell into a landowner who wanted to create a resort at the pond. When he applied for a permit, and he gradually got the land, converted from conservation to urban resort. He quietly got recreational permit to have recreation use of the pond. He began dredging it, and then when he asked to remove portions of the ancient kuapa fish, the wall, he needed a permit from the Corps of Engineers, and that triggered Section 106. And through Section 106, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation advised the Corps of Engineers that, hey, this place has already been designated as a historic landmark. It had landmark status, and they said, perhaps we ought to take a good look at whether we should allow this permit to proceed. Patsy Mink learned of it and said, why don't we ask the Hawaiians what they think of it? So she created a bill that created the Honokohau Study Advisory Commission, and the bill said there should be 14 Native Hawaiians, and by Native Hawaiians they meant those with 50% blood. The commission met over a 2-year period. The questions the Secretary of Interior posed to this commission was, is it feasible, is it desirable that the historic landmark of Keauhou become a unit of the national park system? We met, and it was my pleasure to be part of that commission 40 years ago. And they were composed of Kona Kupuna. I mean, these are real revered people like Ilani Luahine, George Penehaka, Naope, Arthur Chan and Homa Hayes and Mauna Roy, Pilipo Springer, Hannah's father here. And this Kona people, among others, it is feasible. Yes, it is very desirable. And one of the things we said it should be is because of these ponds. This is not a place for 350 trees and tall trees like sequoia. This is not a Yosemite where we have geysers and waterfalls. This is not a half dome. Yeah, there's no big monuments, but what is here is a remnants of a civilization of Kupuna who industriously and with ingenuity made this harsh environment thrive. And what the commissioners found here, walking on the trails that you did, was not these magnificent physical monuments, but an enduring spirit of our Kupuna. And that resulted in what we call the Spirit Report. And others who worked with us were all Hawaiians. The illustrator was Herb Kane. Some of our writers was John Wahe. Yes, he later on became governor. John Wahe was part of the team. Steve Morse. The architect was George Keauhou. But the point I think I'm trying to make here is that it was a special place for many, many years. It was recognized by Congress, by the Advisory Council, by the state of Hawaii. And fortunately, there were laws in place that said before you do anything to a historic place like this, you should get the advice of the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. And in their wisdom, they said, well, why don't we ask the Hawaiians? So who created this park? Your Hawaiian Kupuna. And later on, we'll talk about what that report said. What did it recommend? Especially in terms of water. Because there's no question the spirit of this place would be dead and desolate and destroyed if it wasn't for the continuous flow of waters that, in the cycle that, our Kupuna and our chanter just gave to us this morning. So, in a nutshell, folks, the park was created by Hawaiians. The recommendations that bring us here today were recommended by Native Hawaiians, not by some bureaucrats in Washington. It was by Native Hawaiians from Kona, from Hawaii, who said, this is a special place, let's make it into a national park and keep it that way.
This is one of our ancholine pools in the park. We have over 186 ancholine pools that are identified, mapped, and have some data on. There are other ancholine pools in the park that we have not yet done so for. This pool in particular, well, all right, so we have 186 plus pools in the park. Ancholine pools are extremely rare habitat worldwide. In the United States, they're only found in the state of Hawaii. And this island has the majority of pools in the state because of its youthful age in terms of lava. This pond, so ancholine pools in general are habitat for rare endemic insects, mollusks, that's your snails, and crustaceans. And many of those are extremely rare. At this pond, in particular, we have two candidate endangered species, the orange-black damselfly and the Ophiula metapateus lohena. And there's also two, since we've been here, two native, oh, you took that from me, thank you. Didn't even realize.
Plant salad.
I won't forget the plants. The plant person wants me to remember the plants. But first, the native dragon, where is he? David. Dragonflies, thank you.
With the park and with Uncle Peter, I became fascinated with the artwork of these stones. So for being here, my love and passion is what I love to do. So from what they taught me, I'm taking it on and passing it on to my crew members, which back there I couldn't introduce them, but they have to go. That's Kendo Kang and that's Stan Soyama. So being here, what we did is we took apart the wall, took all the sand out to get the flow back in this pond. We put the stones back in to get the flow. Uncle Peter knew the height because he was here when he was small. He knew where it started off and where it ended. So it was all his Manawa knowledge, just following him and his tutelage onto us. As he passed away and Jay left, I took over right now and just kept the spirit going and continue onward. Actually, all these stones he's standing on right now, where this mangrove, not mangrove, but this is this grass area right here, or this area where the algae is. All these stones was in that area, and we have to take each of them out. All the stones you see in the middle was in the ocean, 40 feet. This was a big hole. never have nothing. The water would just go straight through. Months in, months we would dive, OO bar, goggles, just roll the stones in until we get the big pohaku. That's when we got our excavator. So back then had 1,000 Hawaiians, we only had 3. Then sharing mana'o on the rebuilding of a fish pond wall, the types and techniques, as long with the fish pond. One of the things I learned is the mullet. It has like this, they call it bites or bacteria on it. So you see them jumping. One of the things they say is that when it jumps, has these mites on it that hits the water, it tends to take the mites off. And a marine biologist at that time showed us pictures of the fish having like Keauhou, or what do you say, holes in the body from the bacteria or from outside in the ocean. But the one thing the Hawaiians found out in all fish ponds is where the ponds is and where the brackish water is, these mullets, fish, even with the ava, would cleanse itself. By cleansing itself in the fresh water, that would kill all the mites and keep the fish flourishing. Feeding Kamehameha, the leaves, the chief, the queen, and these stones here, even being set and moved by Kamehameha and the chief. So just this is one big sacred area of putting the stones back and touching from what our ancestors did a long time ago. So by keeping that intact and keeping the fish pond, you just, for generations to come, just keep it flourishing. So without the fresh water, we wouldn't have fish. The Hawaiians wouldn't have food to eat. But what we have now is just a continuous, on generations to come, just keep flourishing and keep the tradition alive. So
is it all dry stack?
All dry stack. No cement. Water flow through, yeah. Through the makaha. We don't have. Yeah, when the tide comes up, it flows through the front areas and towards the end of the wall. So it acts like a filter out the fish pond.
So there's 2 makaha.
2 makaha, one here and one towards the end on the north end.
So the wall kind of sticks out into the fish pond.
So every year we get storm damage, and we finished the wall in 2011 for the first time, and capped up everything in history. And because of the swells, I mean, it's just a matter of us keep coming back and repairing, we stabilize, and just keep it going.
What we're going to talk about now is some of the intertidal, near shore, and coastal environments. So I'd like to introduce Sally Beavers again, and then we'll also hear from Dr. Eric Grossman of the USGS, and then we'll hear from Dr. Darcy Hu about bird species and bird habitat. So thank you.
Thank you. So I guess we're not going to make it all the way down to Aimakapa today, but when you come out of the Palau, look down the beach and you'll see a sand berm, and the fish pond is right down there. And Darcy will be talking a little bit about that. Just before we get started on nearshore stuff, Tyler, will you just give us an orientation of the fish trap?
Yeah, so we're here at Aiopio Fish Trap with Pu'uoina Heiau on Malio Point. Also, Haleo Mano is another name given to the heiau, an earlier name, I believe. Aiopio Fish Trap is constructed of the seawall coming off of Malio Point, coming kind of around to the shoreline, and then there's a series of enclosures or pens that kind of circular go back to the heiau. You know, the exact workings of the fish trap are not totally known to at least the park staff. You know, if the sand beach has changed and is further away from the enclosures or closer, and also the height of the wall, as well as there's a break in the wall near the point that may be a more modern makaha that was introduced. So at lower tide, the wall does stick up a few feet, but of course the high surf is doing its dance with Aiopio Fish Trap.
So the groundwater discharges through along most of the, I think it's about 2.2 miles of coastline in the park, and that, just like I talked about at Keauhou Fish Pond, that sets up estuarine conditions out here, and particularly Aiopio has a lot of discharge coming out. And this area is, so then it's a juvenile nursery habitat for fish. And for some limu, tend to congregate in areas where we have these freshwater seeps offshore. We've been working with U.S. Geological Survey Coastal Geology Group out of Santa Cruz for a very long time now, since And Dr. Eric Grossman has been partnering with us to look at submarine groundwater discharge in Keauhou and its effects on the ecosystem, coral reef ecosystem out there.
I grew up here in Hawaii, and I'm now a research geologist and oceanographer for the U.S. Geological Survey. Most of my research and publications inform how coral reefs develop, how groundwater sort of moves through the system and sets up these estuarine conditions, and then more recently, how sea level rise and climate change influence coastal areas like this and the coral reefs. And I just want to say a few things, important points about this estuary that Sally mentions. This estuary extends pretty far offshore. We see the influence of this lower salinity freshwater coming down and mixing out to the coast. And you actually have to go pretty far offshore, 1 kilometer to sometimes up to 2 and 3 kilometers offshore to get to the marine water. And it's thin out there, and it's a little thicker near shore. It's seeping up, not just through the beach face here and the seeps, but through the whole seafloor. It's just always sort of bubbling up through the seafloor and depressing the salinities. And what's really unique is the temperatures. And so we've done a lot of measurements, and now we have some really interesting, sophisticated models of how the circulation moves through this area, and we can use it as well in the future, and I'll comment that in a minute. But through these measurements, we've seen that this colder, fresher water can be upwards of 1 meter to 3 and 4 meters thick, bathing these areas very persistently. And what's special about this is that the reefs here off of West Hawaii are really the last intact, semi-pristine reefs in the main Hawaiian Islands. They haven't been affected by a lot of other pressures like overfishing, extra nutrients, and various impacts. And so it's really critical that we understand this delicate system. Now what's interesting is those reefs formed here in those estuary conditions for hundreds to thousands of years and have developed into this really beautiful reef system that provides us with a lot of services, some of which we don't really know yet because we haven't fully understood all those biochemical constituents in the reefs that may be important for medicines and such. But it has developed with this estuary condition. And now you've heard around the world there's increasing accounts of coral bleaching, particularly in the Western Pacific, the Caribbean. This year is probably the warmest sea surface temperatures on record. We're reaching 29 degrees right now. There's an actual coral bleaching warning for Oahu as of a couple days ago. And the one thing I want you to go home with is that this groundwater flowing through the system is often several degrees colder, and I mean degrees C, colder than the surrounding seawater. It has the potential to buffer those sea surface temperatures, particularly right now in late summer when corals are much more vulnerable to this bleaching, and potentially kind of buffer bleaching in Hawaii and provide a little bit more resilient area for corals to thrive, particularly in the next few decades as things change and potentially get warmer. The second point is the reason why there's this estuary here is fairly unique conditions in Hawaii. All the islands have some brackish waters at the shore, but they don't set up such vast areas of an estuary like here. And it's partly because of the orientation of the coast. We don't get real big waves. It's the way the currents delicately move through here. And all of that is very vulnerable to climate change and sea level rise. Slight changes in the wind direction can change that circulation pattern and potentially change the estuary. And certainly everything we've talked about with using groundwater up on land can change that estuary as well. The projections for the future are a lot more drier conditions.
I'm a regional office ecologist. I work for the National Park Service, the Pacific West region. Oh, sorry. I work for the regional office, Pacific West region. I'm an ecologist. My most of my experience has to do with birds, native birds here, mostly seabirds and nene, so recovery of endangered birds. I haven't worked a lot with water birds, but I am going to speak a little bit about them today and try to cover some basics on them. Just sort of starting big picture, wetlands statewide. We've lost about 1/3 of our wetlands statewide over the last 100 years plus. So, you know, just an increasingly sort of rare system. And culturally, I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir, but culturally, wetlands such as fish ponds offer services like traditional aquaculture. They grow materials, Makaloa sedge, and they house species that have importance in native traditions and sayings, Alku'u and Alai Ko'e, Alai Ula. Biologically, they are also rich, and in particular, I think the wetlands here are really the hot spot for surviving native bird species. So I'm talking everything from migratory shorebirds, migratory waterfowl, as well as the endemic waterfowl that we have. Really, there aren't too many other places where you can go in the lowlands and see so many native bird species. This island has very limited wetlands, I think really because of its young substrate. So just sort of speaking to the importance of the wetlands here and a few others along the coast, to certainly the leeward side of the island, but the whole island, really. There are a few wetlands that are just very important. Aimakapa and Koloko are two of them. And their importance is kind of highlighted in the recovery plan for the endemic water birds. And so they've been designated as core wetlands, and that has a specific meaning. And what it denotes is that those wetlands are essential to recover the numbers of birds needed to attain recovered status. So really, without those wetlands, those species are unlikely to recover. And when I say those species, I'll just kind of confine it to the species that are important to this park. And so that's Hawaiian coot and Hawaiian stilt, two endemic endangered water birds. So endangered both state and federally. The habitat needs for both of them are similar. Coots like sort of deeper water, less than a foot up to 4 feet. They like this mix of open water and emergent vegetation. They have these lobed feet, and they don't take off very well, so they need sort of an aquatic runway. So they like this, you know, enough open water to do that. They're omnivorous. They feed on aquatic plants, animals. Their diet's actually not very well known. There's still, you know, a lot about these birds that we don't really understand. They will feed, and you can see them in Aimakapa. So they really prefer fresh water and fresher water. Brackish, they'll definitely use brackish. Rarely see them in saline solution or saline situations, so saltwater, oceanic situations. And in fact, for nesting, the chicks need fresh water. So they really do need freshwater habitat in which to breed. And that's one of the goals of these core wetlands, is that they have to support breeding populations of these birds, because there really just are no other places where these birds can successfully reproduce. And like Sally said, you know, their young will recruit and their young will reproduce. You know, that's obviously how we have sustaining populations. Stilts, a little bit different. They like these very shallow mud flats where they feed on aquatic invertebrates and small fish. And stilts are have a little bit wider tolerance in terms of salinity. So you will see them and sometimes I've seen them, you know, in reef situations, but definitely freshwater, brackish, so all the way, the whole range. But for nesting, really, they too are very similar to coots in that they prefer fresh water. They will nest more in freshwater situations, and their nests will be more successful in freshwater situations. So I don't think we really understand whether the chicks drink fresh water, that kind of thing, but that's sort of what the observations support at this point. Let's see, was there anything else I was going to mention about them? The stilt is a subspecies of the blackneck stilt, which is found on the U.S. West Coast. And so the blackneck stilt, at least in the West, is one of the threats to that species. There is increased salinization of, on the West Coast. We're associated with, not necessarily the same situation here, but certainly what folks are observing there and what they are worried about is that changes their ecosystem there, and that's going to adversely impact mainland blackneck stilts. I don't know if we have that sort of precise information on Hawaiian stilts, but I think just based on what we know about their breeding sort of capabilities and the range of habitats they'll use, we do need fresh water. We don't see them nesting in Keauhou, which is much more saline, Keauhou fish pond. So we do see them nesting in Aimakapa. And same with the coots. The coots rarely use Keauhou, that's
Coots
right?
don't use Keauhou.
Right,
Neither
right.
species, stilts forage at Keauhou,
Right,
but there's
right.
no breeding there. And coots do not use Keauhou.
Yeah,
It's
so
too salty.
neither adults nor chicks, coot chicks.
Sorry, I'm not as familiar with the coot and stilt. Is this Alku'u and?
No, Alku'u is a black-crowned night heron.
Okay.
So that's a
Can you just tell me the Hawaiian name?
Alai Ko'e and Io. And I might not be pronouncing the stilt correctly because I really don't hear people using that name. Yeah, yeah. So the stilts have these long pink legs, stilts, and they like the shallow water. They really don't like to get their breast and belly feathers wet. And so they will forage in more salty situations, but their chicks can't handle that. So for breeding, they really do need this fresh and fresher situations. And just really quickly, the last thing I was going to mention was amongst the threats to these water birds that I think is germane to the conversation I think you guys will have amongst you is habitat degradation. And so for these guys, because of their needs for breeding habitat, I think increasingly salty situations are not going to be good for these birds in terms of allowing them to breed and breed successfully. And also, obviously, water quality is important too. Clean water inputs. The other thing that's a little murkier is avian botulism, and the circumstances under which avian botulism develops are still really poorly understood. But there was a major botulism outbreak here in Aimakapa in 1996, and one of the sort of thoughts, it's speculative, published though, was that the fairly long drought up to that point had decreased freshwater inputs, both directly from rainfall and from groundwater inputs, and that may have contributed to the conditions that led to the outbreak. So, when we don't understand that, I think it's something to keep in mind, and more work is done all the time, so perhaps that will become clearer in the future.